Hi guys, in this video we will discuss how we can send client-side events in real time. A good example is the typing notification that we typically see in chat applications. So for example, we have a chat application here that I created for this example. On the left side, Ruth is logged in and we have a list of users here. For example, these are her friends. Okay, so on the left side, Linda's account is logged in. And let's send a message to Ruth, for example. So when I type here, you will see on the right side the typical typing notification icon that we see in chat applications. So let's type again. There's the typing indicator. So when we open the chat box and type again, we will see the typing indicator both in the chat box and here in the sidebar. Okay, so let's try it from Ruth's side. So when we type in the chat box, the same thing will happen. We will see the typing indicator in the chat box as well as in the sidebar on Linda's account, the one we are messaging. So let's say we type a message. I don't know what to say. Okay, we see the indicators. And then when we click the send button, the message will be received on the other side. Next, let's send a message from Linda's account. What do you mean? Is it hard? You will notice the typing indicators appear once more. As soon as we send the message, Ruth will receive it. Okay, but in this video, we won't delve into how I created this chat application entirely. Instead, I'll focus on discussing how we can send client-side events, like this example where I'm sending typing indicators when our chat partner is typing a message. Most modern chat applications provide a real-time feedback to indicate whether our conversation partner is typing a message. That's specifically what we'll discuss in this video. But I will link the project files in the video description so you can download and try them on your local development machine if you'd like. So you can also extend the functionality of this chat application or simply play around with it. This example is a fully working chat application specifically designed for peer-to-peer conversations, meaning it supports only one-on-one chats. However, if you want to extend it to include group chats or create a chat rooms, for example, and even add participants to the chat, you can do that too. It's up to you. Once again, I'll include the project files link in the description below. Okay, let's get started. Here's our chat application. Let's open the chat panels for Linda and Ruth. Okay, I already have some conversations set up here. First, let's run our WebSocket server. We'll do this by running PHP artisan reverb start. And I'll add a debug flag so we can see the responses in our terminal. Next, let's also run our queue worker so we could dispatch our event for sending the message. Let's switch back to our browsers. Now, let's try sending a message. Let's send a message to Linda, for example. Yes, it's hard. 500 unique designs. Send. Notice that currently our typing indicators aren't visible yet. That's what we'll work on in this lesson. So, when I type here, you'll see that there is no typing indicator yet, right? But our message was sent. Now let's add the functionality to send a real-time feedback with our typing indicator so we can see when our chat partner is typing. When we go to the broadcasting documentation of Laravel, make sure that Laravel Reverb and broadcasting are set up so we can send messages. In this documentation, you'll learn how to set this up, but I'll assume we already have a Laravel Reverb and broadcasting set up. If you are starting from scratch, you can refer to this documentation. Now, returning to the table of contents in this documentation, you'll find client events towards the end. When we visit this section, we'll learn how to implement our client-side events. Actually, it's quite simple. It only involves a couple of lines of code here in the documentation, but we'll make a few adjustments in our implementation. Here's the method to whisper or to send a typing event. And down here, this is how we listen for client-side events. Okay, let's copy this code. Then let's go to our code editor. Let's start by placing it in our conversation panel component. The conversation panel is the panel that pops up where we can compose messages. So as you can see, this box here is our conversation panel component. Okay, now let's place our event listener or the function to send client events here below. Let's create a function here. Let's name it send typing event. And let's paste the code snippet from the Laravel documentation here. So what this does is it sends an event to the channel we specify here. This is a private channel, so let's change the channel name. But first, if we go to our channels route, I have set up a channel named messages here. Let's change the channel name from chat to messages. Then we pass the recipient's ID here, who will receive our typing event. Usually, this is the recipient notified that their conversation partner is typing. So this is the ID of the user to whom we are sending our event. I passed it as a prop to our conversation panel component. Let me explain a bit about what I did here. So in our authenticated layout component, we have a sidebar here where the list of our friends is displayed. So when we navigate to the scroll shadow component, it lists the users we can send a message. Here, when I click on one of them, it triggers the handle select user function, where we pass the details of the recipient or our conversation partner. These details, including the ID, are then passed to our conversation panel as a prop. That's how I set it up here. Not too complicated, it's a simple sharing of data between components. So now I can pass the recipient's ID to our event. And then, in this callback function, instead of name, we need to specify who sent the event. In our case, we'll pass the sender's ID here, which is whoever is typing the message. So let's say sender ID, and here we'll simply pass the ID of the one who's typing, which is user.id. This is the currently authenticated user. Okay, we have completed the implementation for sending the typing event. Now let's proceed to create the event listener to receive the typing events. Here below, let's say, listen for typing events. Let's create a variable or a function called listen for typing event. Or simply listen for typing. Let's take the code snippet from the Laravel documentation. This one. Let's copy it and paste it here. Like our sending typing event, let's also change the channel where we'll listen for the event. Let's say messages. And here in the ID, instead of the recipient ID, since we're listening for the event, we'll use the ID of the currently authenticated user. So it will be user.id. The event name will just be typing. We don't need to change anything there. In our event callback, let's change the name to event instead of e. Let's remove this console log for now. So in our listen for typing function, we need to detect if our chat partner is typing or not. To do that, we'll create a new state called isTyping. Let's initialize it to false. In our callback, when we receive an event indicating someone is typing, we'll update the isTyping state to true to indicate that our chat partner is currently typing in the chat box. Later, we will use this state as a condition to show our typing indicator animation in the chat box. Additionally, we need to determine who the recipient of the typing notification is. So let's create another state here. Let's call it isTyping notification recipient. And initialize it to null. This is the state that will hold the ID of whoever is currently typing in the chat box. So we could properly show the typing indicator icon whenever the sender is typing. In the callback, when we receive the typing event, we'll simply update our state to event.senderID. This should be the ID of the user who's typing. Okay, let's proceed with integrating our listen for typing function when our component mounts. Since this is React, we'll place it inside the useEffect hook. I'll put this function here, and I'll pass the recipient of our event to it. After this, we can test it out. But before we do that, let's log some data to the console first to see if we can receive any events coming in. For example, console.log, and we'll log the event we received. All right, let's go back to our browsers and test it. Open the console on both browsers. Also open our conversation panel. Okay, let's send a message to Linda. Now type in the chat box. As you can see, we're not receiving any events. Our consoles are blank. What's happening here is because we haven't actually triggered the function to send the event. Our send typing event is left unused or not triggered at all. So we need to trigger this every time we type a message in the chat box. So let's go to the text area where we can compose our message. Okay, it's here at the bottom. Let's emit an event using the onKeyDown event handler, and we'll simply pass the send typing event to trigger our function. All right, let's go back to our browsers. Let's try typing again. When we type a message, you'll see in the console on the other side that our client-side event was received. As you can see, when I type again, our log in the console just adds to it. So it's working. Okay, next, of course, we need to show the typing indicator in our chat box. So first, let's go to our terminal, and you'll see we have output data here. Every time we type a message, you'll see the event name, which is the client typing. Client here means it's a client-side event, and the typing keyword is the exact name of the event we dispatched. You'll also see the sender's ID here, and in the channel property, you'll see this is a private channel broadcasting to the messages channel. And our receiver is the user with an ID of 2. Okay, so we are correctly broadcasting the events. So let's go back to the code editor. Okay, let's proceed to display the typing indicator. Up here in our listen for typing event, we have two states, is typing and typing notification recipient. We'll use them as conditions to show the typing indicator. I have prepared a typing indicator component here, which is a simple SVG component. Here we'll say is typing and check if it's true. And if recipient.id is equal to our typing notification recipient state. Then we'll show the typing indicator if it satisfies both requirements. So let's go back to the browsers. As you can see, here's our typing indicator. Let's refresh the pages to start fresh. Now, pay attention to the bottom left corner of this chat box. So when we type something here, we can see that the typing indicator now appears. And if I type again, as you can see, we got the responses back in our console at the left. But notice when I stop typing, the typing indicator is still there. We need to dismiss this when the user stops typing. Okay, let's address the issue of the typing indicator persisting even after we stop typing. Up here, we'll set a timer using setTimeout. We'll set the is typing state to false again after 2 seconds. Let's go back to the browser. Let's refresh the page. Okay, let's open the panel again, and let's try typing. Okay, after 2 seconds, you'll see the typing indicator disappears when we stop typing. Now, the issue is that there are some inconsistencies where the typing indicator suddenly disappears even though we are still typing. This happens because our timer isn't properly resetting every time we stop and then resume typing. So there's a bit of inconsistency here. To fix this, here's how I solved it. I created a reference for the current timeout using useRef from React. I initialize it to null. Our typing timeout ref will hold the reference to our set timeout. So after receiving the typing event, every time someone types, we clear the timer and then reset it. Additionally, let's include this in our useEffect cleanup function to reset the timer every time our component unmounts. Okay? So let's say clear timeout. Then the current timer reference. So let's say here clear timer when component unmounts. After refreshing the browsers, let's try typing again. Notice how after I stop typing for 2 seconds, the typing indicator disappears properly. When we resume typing, it no longer disappears abruptly. After we stop typing, it now properly dismisses after 2 seconds. Okay, let's try to send a message. There we go. The message sent properly. As you can see, when we type, let's try another one. Okay, it's working well. And the typing indicators are displaying properly. Now we need to display our typing indicator here in the sidebar as well. This ensures that even if our conversation dialog is closed, we can still see who is typing a message from our sidebar. Let's go back to the code editor. Here in our authenticated layout component, we can see our sidebar and also the conversation component, which is this one. This is our chat box. Up here, within the scroll shadow component, this is where we have our list of users who can be messaged. So when we go back to the browser, this is it. This is the scroll shadow component. And on the right side of the user, whoever is typing, we should also see our typing indicator here. So just in case the chat box is closed, we can still see the typing indicator indicating someone is typing a message. Okay, let's go to the top part of our code. This is where we'll place our event listener. So let's go back to our conversation panel component. All we need to do is to copy our listen for typing function along with these states. Okay, the whole thing. In our authenticated layout component, let's add a comment here. Listen for typing events. Then let's just paste the code from our chat box component here. Also, let's import the useRef hook. And in our useEffect hook, every time our component unmounts, let's initialize the listen for typing function. And for good measure, in our cleanup function, let's also clear our timer every time the component unmounts. Okay, the next thing we'll do is show our typing indicator every time someone types a message here. So let's go to our scroll shadow component. And here at the bottom, okay, it's here. So let's create a condition here, just like in our chat box component. Let's say is typing, and if the typing notification recipient is equal to the member.id, whoever we selected in our member list, and if all those conditions are satisfied, let's show our typing indicator. Okay, let's test it. Let's go back to our browsers and let's message Ruth. Open the chat box. And whoops, looks like we have an error. Let's open the console and check. It seems we forgot to import our typing indicator component. Make sure the component is imported. It's imported here at the top. So let's try it again. Refresh the browser. As you can see, here's our typing indicator. So when we type again, it shows up. Okay, let's try opening the chat box. And we need to make sure that the typing indicator shows up in our sidebar and in our chat box component. Okay, as you can see, it's working. When I type, after 2 seconds, the indicator disappears too. Let's open the chat box of another user, Zaria, for example. Since Zaria doesn't have any messages yet, when we type here, of course, the typing indicator won't show for Zaria because she's not the one we're messaging. Now let's open Linda's chat box again. And as you can see, our typing indicators are now working. Let's test this on the other side. Let's message Linda. So when I type, yes, that would be great. And the typing indicators are working on the other side as well. Just a quick note, since these are client-side events, we don't need the queue worker running to receive the client-side events. So if I stop the queue worker in our terminal and return to the browsers, when I type here, the real-time typing indicators will still work because we don't need a backend interaction for this to function. Because this is a client-side event. As long as our WebSocket server is running, the typing indicators will work. So if I send this now, for example, you'll see we won't receive any messages here because we disabled our queue worker. Let's go back to the terminal and run our queue worker again. As you can see here, the message was sent after we restarted our queue worker. Okay, everything is working fine now. Just a reminder that this example is a fully working peer-to-peer chat application. When I scroll up here in the messages, the previous messages will dynamically load, similar to the typical messaging applications today. So again, if you want to check out the source code, I'll share the source of our simple project in case you want to try it on your local machine. And lastly, a quick tip. If you notice, our event listener exists in 2 separate components, here in our authenticated layout component, and also in our conversation panel component. Optionally, you can refactor it to make our code more reusable. For example, we can create a custom hook so we could use it in other components as well without duplicating the code. But I won't do it now since this is just a simple example, but you got the idea. Okay, so that concludes our simple example of how we can utilize the real-time client-side event of Laravel Echo or Reverb. Again, I will link the source code in the video description if you want to check it out. So if you liked the video, please do me a favor and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, guys. See you next time.